Everyone, this is Dr. Sheraze and
Nanda, and we are here with a super exciting episode, a kickoff episode actually, of the Optimal Alignment Health podcast. What a way to start our verbal auditory adventures into education than with one of our all-time heroes, Dr. T. Colin Campbell.
the man, the legend himself. We're just hitting the ground running with The Future of Nutrition, his new book. And we're going to be talking with him on a variety of different topics, which we think you're going to really enjoy. We're so excited about this interview and this podcast. So for those of you guys who do not know the man, the legend, we're just going to give you a little bit of a background so that way you can understand the immensity of what we're doing here today.
Just as an idea of why he's one of our all-time heroes and really one of the all-time heroes of anyone who is in the longevity or I want to live for a long time movement. He is just a force of nature. He is the Jacob Gold Sherman Professor Emeritus, Division of Nutritional Sciences, Cornell University. He has done a whole lot of research in his day. We'll get to that. But the man is a pillar of what nutrition and what sound mind would say. And this is after a lifetime of being in the business. One of the things that we talk about in this podcast is, a quote from him is, how did we get to a place where the companies that profit from our sickness are the ones telling us how to be healthy? Where the companies that profit from our food choices are the ones telling us what to eat.
He is pioneering the health movement, the whole food, plant-based nutrition from a standpoint of deep understanding of nutritional biochemistry. And so when we're looking at what is the intention of the body, what are the foods that we should be eating to thrive, it's coming from this source, and it's going to be a difference between what he said here exactly than these people who are profiting. And so we get to hear firsthand, somebody who's studied the depths of biochemistry and nutrition to be able to understand what is it that our cells actually require and need.
And he started off as a aspiring, first veterinarian, but grew up on a dairy farm, and then went into biochemistry to study protein, in particular, the molecules that are so present in cow's milk and in cow flesh. And he was going to promote their importance and learn about these life-giving molecules so that he could share that information and help the dairy industry to get their message across about how important their products is. And after all of his research, a lifetime of it, he says a good diet is the most powerful weapon we have against disease and sickness. He's done a couple other notable things. Dr. Campbell was one of the number one authors, or the originator of the China Study.
Get your hands on this book. It is a eye-opener in terms of understanding nutrition. It
is highly debated and argued amongst the nutrition people. However, it is an absolute anomaly, and I don't even know the words to describe the immensity of how big this study is, and the fact that it took decades of research and hundreds of thousands of researchers to survey China, like to survey massive areas and to get in-depth information on so many different things and aspects of their diet and their blood markers and their sicknesses and where people are dying from what and how we can relate these things together. The book is absolutely
phenomenal.
A treasure trove of
the research amongst research on nutrition.
There's never been anything even close. He also is the author of The Low Carb Fraud, where he goes into more detail in the science and literature about how the low carb diets pretty much are the opposite of what they say they're going to do, starting with Atkins, who was an overweight, unhealthy man who died of heart disease, which is not a good advertisement for your philosophy when you die of the thing that it's supposed to be helping.
Going into even more depth of your understanding, why is it that we require whole foods as opposed to processed foods? What are the actual components of the whole foods and the cofactors that come from eating a whole plant versus a supplement, and understanding the difference between the different types of diets here? And so again, you're looking at a movement that Dr. Campbell is just pioneering on the necessity of health and whole foods.
We are interrelated. You cannot separate the component parts from the whole and expect to understand how the thing works, right? That's why we know that we don't live in a Newtonian world. The body is not Newtonian. Molecular biology knows that you cannot explain the inner workings of a molecule from a Newtonian perspective because it's not linear like that. So, and also one of his most recent books, The Future of Nutrition. Again, going over the science and the holistic nature of the entire picture. In his books, he also goes into some of the politics that go into these issues and understanding the inner workings. And he's been on the boards of these major political task forces and assignments and
policy reforms, and understanding like what it is that needs to happen in order for these companies not to dictate policies on food, but to really have it come from a academic understanding of how the body works and how do we get our politics to change. So listen, in addition to all these best-selling books, he has authored over 350 studies. That is a lot of research to have published. Who knows how many countless studies he has been a part of or referenced by, but personally authored over 350 studies over his career. He has been the senior science advisor for the World Cancer Research Fund and American Institute for Cancer Research, leading one of the first pioneering studies into how we should recommend food, nutrition, and nutrient intake choices based off of the state of the entire country in an effort to promote health, not just to fight disease, but to prevent it through our daily dietary choices. He served on multiple Senate committees for national nutritional guidance to reduce disease and promote health. He is on the advisory board of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And recently he has funded the nonprofit T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell. Obviously, he's been a guest speaker, hundreds of presentations everywhere. Worldwide. The guest seen him on Forks Over Knives and and so many major documentaries that it's overwhelming the amount of work that he's put in and the effort he's put in.
To go back again and just to do a little recap, he started on a dairy, right? He started as a dairy farmer out there doing the dairy milking work of the good people, and he found out the dairy is scary. Once he got into biochemical research, he was in a lab and doing work, and he saw a couple studies that had been performed over 50 years ago, 47 years ago, in 1968, 1974, where people had looked at the implication of dietary protein and advancing cancer. And the research was very startling, and to his surprise, it had never been reproduced where in more recent years, where if you increase the dietary protein intake of an animal versus a animal with reduced dietary protein intake, then the animals with more protein intake are much more likely to get cancer, have more advanced cancer, and to die of cancer at a much earlier age.
Versus 5% of dietary protein?
Right. And so in several of these studies, he actually, so they have all these rats, right? And these rats are all predetermined genetically to possess cancer-causing aspects in their cells. They have genetic mutations that make them much more likely to get cancer than a regular animal who doesn't have this. And what he found, he had 20% dietary intake in a group of these rats. And they went through a whole study and the life cycle, or however many weeks these rats were supposed to be alive. And the group of rats that were eating a 20% protein diet, specifically casein, specifically the type of protein that is found in dairy. 20% dietary intake from casein, the protein in dairy, led to 30 out of 30 of these rats dying and developing severe, lethal cancer. In the rats, in the group of animals that only had a 5% intake of dietary protein, not one of them developed cancer, and they all lived through the length of the study. That is astronomical.
That is a substantial, significant conclusion in terms of dietary protein.
Right. That is the most, if with these type of rates and statistics and over all the studies, he found that our diet and our diet choices are some of the most carcinogenic things that exist, ever researched. The most cancer-causing agents we've ever researched have been some of these dietary choices that all of us make every single day. The terrifying thing is how effective the casein protein was at causing cancer in these rodents. You can see after just a couple weeks how the rats who were eating a 20% intake in protein immediately started to develop mutations and chemical initiations of the cancer process. Immediately. And then after 6 weeks and 9 weeks, they all are having cancer and they're all dying over because of their dietary choices.
Unbelievable. Yeah, this is just insane that this research has been out for so long and we still are having this question about dietary protein. This is just a no-brainer.
So we added these couple slides in here at the front end just because we want to review this. This is some of Dr. Campbell's most pioneering work. We wanted to have a conversation kind of on the broader spectrum of some different aspects of things. So we covered this in the introduction or in the intro when we're first talking. And we are so excited to get to the video and to have our interview.
Yeah, we hope you guys enjoy it. And any questions or comments, let us know. This is our first podcast with the man, so hopefully we'll have so many more coming up.
It's a little bit rough, maybe on some points, but we did an all right job. Hang in there and enjoy.
All right, guys, welcome to the Optimal Alignment Health Podcast. Today's
special guest is none other than Dr. Thomas Colin Campbell, T. Colin Campbell himself.
The man, the legend.
Literally the legend, one of the OG people, humans who are really leading the movement of nutrition. And not just nutrition, but leading the evidence-based movement towards a functional, healthy diet that humanity can adopt, it is good for your livelihood.
We are your hosts. This is Dr. Sheraze.
I'm Nanda. We are super excited about this first episode. So, if you don't know about Dr. Thomas Campbell, he was the Senior Science Advisor for the World Cancer Research Fund and American Institute for Cancer Research.
Wow.
He served on multiple Senate committees for national nutritional guidance to reduce disease and promote health, including some of the first ever committees that the government was putting in place to look for nutritional guidance. He is on the advisory board of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
He also funded the nonprofit T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. Hundreds of presentations worldwide. I mean, it would be shocking if you haven't heard or seen him yet. He's guest in many major documentaries, including Forks Over Knives, watch it if you haven't already, and many more.
In addition to all that, Dr. Campbell is the author on over 350 studies. That is a lot of research, everybody. I mean, you're talking about a lot of research. That is really, really impressive amount of literature for any one human to contribute to the knowledge base of the rest of mankind.
He's been busy.
He has been busy diligently working to figure out how you can be healthy and live longer and not have disease, which we're really grateful for.
I think he's written some books too, yeah?
Yes, he did. So, if you are unaware, we'll just go through them quickly. He is the author of The China Study, the largest and most comprehensive study on nutrition ever conducted. I mean, you're talking about millions of people in the study, including hundreds of thousands of researchers gathering data all across the continent of Asia and the entirety of China. It's amazing.
And this study itself just uncovers the importance of nutrition and what we're eating alongside chronic diseases. So this is the book to read.
That was 20 years in the making for that study. In addition, he has authored The Low Carb Fraud, where you go over how this low carb thing is really not what it appears to be in the literature.
And the book Whole, where you are just looking at what is the value importance of a whole food diet, meaning straight from the farm to the table, from the plant into your mouth. This is just a look again at why we eat this whole plant diet.
Whole, all of the component parts, all of them coming together, as well as the whole system and how our system needs to be looked at very carefully to make improvements. That's how you make improvements, is you evaluate and then you make necessary changes.
In the Future of Nutrition, this book here is his most recent book out in the market, and he is talking about our current situation globally and as far as litigation goes and how systems are being designed by government and what is the future of nutrition and where are we heading with it.
So, here we go. Without further ado, we will get to the podcast. We hope you enjoy. If you have any questions or comments, write them down, let us know, and have a great time.
Hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today with us, Dr. Campbell. We are so blessed and honored. This is a real treat for us. We've been studying your work for many years. Author of The China Study, the world's largest ever nutritional endeavor ever by far. Recently, the book's Whole, and most recently, The Future of Nutrition. And so I will try to paraphrase for everyone some of the amazing work that you have done to get kind of caught up to speed with where our questions start. And so, Dr. Campbell, you started off as a dairy farmer, right? And you went to school biochemistry, in the field of biochemistry, to study the amazing, wonderful proteins of animals and how they can be good for a human. And then when you started your research, you found out that you could actually turn on and off cancer with protein in mice. in the proliferative stage, so in the beginning of cancer, and with a diet of 20% or more, cancer genes turned on, they started proliferating, and then when you turned it down, or if you had it 5%, then the cancer genes never turned on at all, or they were much less proliferative, which is the real danger in cancer, is the proliferation aspect that turns into real serious things. And that's amazing, that protein, which was very alarming to you as a dairy farmer growing up, because you were thinking you were going to be proving that dairy protein was actually good for a human, which we're all indoctrinated into this society, that milk and dairy is good for your bones and your health, and protein, got to have your protein. But then you went even further, and you actually had mice go through a whole life cycle. And you, through a whole life cycle of like 100 weeks or something, or no, like 2 years or something, where you had these mice that were genetically predisposed to liver cancer, living on a diet, and the mice, the group of mice that was living on a 20% of cancer diet from casein, the main protein in dairy, they all died. They all died. Not one of them lived to the end of the study, which is really powerful. And then the mice that were only on a 5% protein diet, which is below the recommended RDA for protein, not even RDA, the recommended minimum of protein for an organism is, a human is like 10% or 12%. And all of those mice were, as you said, thrifty. They were still sleek and smooth, and they were running around and like healthy. That's amazing.
Impressive.
Amazing,
wow.
amazing, game-changing research. And for all of this, and so for this amazing work on knowledge and information on how nutrition is related to cancer proliferation that leads to early death, you have almost been kicked out of medical science on numerous occasions, which is not a joke. That's real. And so we'll get into the policy. We absolutely, are so excited to ask you policy questions. But so back, and that was just a summary, because I know you give that whole spiel a lot, and if that was accurate, then you can correct anything that's inaccurate. But the real question that, so when it's the cancer on versus the cancer off with the protein, does it come down to inflammation and pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant versus pro-oxidant?
Yes, if we're speaking just about protein itself, it has its own properties, and it does. I mean, I was assuming in those days, I wanted to know exactly what protein could do, whether the protein from animals was the same as the protein from plants, for example, and then using different levels of that. Incidentally, a lot of the early work was in rats.
Rats?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not there's a big difference, it's the same lessons. But in any case, the protein could turn, when you elevate the animal protein from milk in this case, turn the cancer on and then turn off. I mean, when you see that kind of thing too, you go, wow, this is impossible. So then the next challenge in that kind of research, if you want to tell somebody that's kind of unbelievable, so the best way to get around that, let's learn how it works.
Right.
So we did look, as a biochemist, for example, we looked for the biochemical reactions that were most significant in causing that cell to be turned on.
Right.
That was a moment that, it was overdone over 10, 12 years. Several doctoral students who would come and do a doctoral dissertation on just one possible mechanism. We called it a key mechanism. And so we found one in the first instance, and then somebody else comes have another student. I couldn't tell whether that's the key. It could have explained the whole story, possibly, but I just, for the sake of the next student, wanted to have a doctoral dissertation. Let's try and look at something else.
Right.
So we went through that whole process, and it was just mind-blowing because I finally get, after doing at least 10 or 12 of these so-called mechanisms, each one of which we assume is an independent activity.
Right.
When we start, all of them, and some of them were elevated with the high proteins, a couple were decreased, but it turned out, regardless of whether it was elevated or decreased, every change in one of those activities all pointed in the same direction. It all fed into either the increase in cancer or the decrease.
Right.
And I thought, something, and I couldn't identify which mechanism it was. That's really what it was. And so then you get a new awareness, in a sense, awareness that there's not a single mechanism here probably in most cases. It's a whole constellation.
Right.
Things working
Right.
together.
The constellation, a symphony.
Was there?
That's right, the symphony, and some of them are coming from this part of the cell, another part of the cell, where they all had different purposes, like increasing hormone levels, or changing the rate at which the carcinogen crosses into the cell, or changing an enzyme activity to change the way it metabolizes stuff. It turns out each one of those mechanisms were, as we think in science, only independent. No, they're not.
Right.
They're not.
Right.
And somehow they're all working together, even though they may come from different cells, different parts of the body, whatever. All of it is working together. Of course, there's a light bulb went on.
Yeah.
Was there a Eureka moment for you that propelled?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Like this right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's well, it was also part of the China study too in the beginning, but I tried to deal a little bit further with this book.
So, what is the difference chemically and biomechanical? Like, what is the actual mechanism of an antioxidant versus a pro-oxidant?
And well, here you have to go back to a couple of basics on this here.
Yeah.
Photosynthesis. Yeah, I'm sure you know what
Yes.
photosynthesis.
Chlorophyll.
In plants are looking at getting the solar energy,
Yeah.
right? And they're capturing that solar energy and converting it into chemical energy in the form of chemical bonds, okay? So the energy is coming in whatever form it is. It's a very highly reactive process.
Right.
Electrons are being thrown around here and there in a sense.
Turning radioactive energy into.
Into something useful.
Yeah.
And so that happens in the cell, in a place called a photosynthesis center.
okay.
And that's been visualized, that's been published. And so these photosynthetic centers, pulling in the energy like that, turning it into chemical bonds as it synthesizes new chemicals. In this case, it was sugar, basically.
Yeah.
Right, so as it's pulling that energy in, it does it in a way in which it's got to protect the process of electrons spinning off here and there. I mean, because if they do that, then we get dangerous compounds,
Right.
free radicals, essentially. So they shoot off here, shoot off there. Well, in the photosynthesis center, nature has it such that where this little factory is working away, it's surrounded with a layer of antioxidants, right, to protect against the damage that might be done if some of those electrons escape and went elsewhere. So you've got the oxidant is the electrons being shot off, right? That could cause a lot of damage.
Right.
But then the plant has this layer, essentially, of a lot of different so-called carotenoids, antioxidants. So the pro-oxidants are the reactive agents coming off, maybe. You got to keep them under control. So you have these antioxidants, keeping them under control.
So then, just to visualize that, that's kind of like a machine. Like if there were no antioxidants and carotenoids around the photosynthesis center, that would be like machine gun bullets going out in every direction, and the electrons are kind of like the bullets, where they can do damage to whatever they run into. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Bullets shooting this way, that way, and other ways. And so when we consume food, we actually use too. Our tissues use these free radicals, these oxygen-free radicals. Reactive oxygen species, something they're called, but we use them to good effect, believe it or not. We use them at times in a very protected environment. It does some good. They do good things. They basically can kill bacteria. That little picture you showed me of that amoeba floating around like that protozoan.
Yeah.
Probably has some in there. They basically use these free radicals in a very, very coordinated way. So they can use to kill foreign tissues, like cancer cells.
Right.
So it's one of the natural mechanisms for the body to resist, to kill these cancer cells. Also, if they're unattended and sort of expanded too much, that increases aging. So over-oxidation actually promotes aging. It promotes cancer. There's two things. Turns out protein, high animal protein, one of the mechanisms is really the fact that it tends to stimulate, overstimulate the production of these free radicals. So the high animal protein, and it does that primarily through increasing an enzyme that's doing some other work. That's basically converting a carcinogen into a reactive metabolite that then binds to DNA. But that enzyme is called mixed function oxidase. That what happens, the animal protein increases that enzyme activity. Now we're getting, let's say, an excessive amount of metabolism. The reactions are going faster. Reactive oxygen species spill out, and they come and they attack the DNA. And then the body tries to repair the DNA, and then it spills out into the urine, so we can test that kind of thing. So the oxidants are these free radicals, which can be good things under controlled conditions. They really do, whether it's in the plant or the animal. The antioxidants are there to keep this under control. So antioxidants become terribly important. It sort of represses that excessive sort of pro-oxidant activity.
So what you're...
Yeah, so which goes back to, so plant-based foods are not pro-oxidants. There's no...
That's right, they tend to be antioxidants, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And because they've got a lot of antioxidants there. And we can't synthesize those antioxidants by the way in our body. That's
Right.
key. We need to eat those plants to get those
Essential.
antioxidants. Or said another way, this is kind of proof that we evolved on eating plants.
Yeah.
So when you look at all the work that you've been doing and the discussions we've been having of a whole food plant-based diet, it's completely not on this reductionist theory of this vitamin, this mineral, this
Right.
phytosterol. And I think that's kind of the eureka of really recognizing the nature of us, to recognize that even with all the research we've done, you can't pinpoint one mechanism in particular that's eradicating or balancing out the free radicals. I think what we're talking about is imbalance in how we're eating, or an imbalance in how we're living.
Right.
And I think one of the most profound things, like you spoke to us the other day, was just in a simple example of the olive, and being able to identify, like when you extract just the olive oil, you're missing out on all the proponents of the anti-inflammatory and the pro-inflammatory markers. Would you be willing to re-emphasize that for our audience base? And
A better example than olive oil is just the oil from plants.
Excellent.
Polyunsaturated fatty acids.
So in general, just isolate.
Yeah, the olive oil
Isolate,
looks
right.
less damaging in that way, in the sense that it's composed of monounsaturated fatty acids. That's one unsaturation bond in this long chain. Polyunsaturated is 1, 2, 3 or so different bonds in that string of those methyl groups. They're subject to oxidation. So, I forget what was going to go in that there.
The oil in plants.
Oh yeah, so the oil in plants comes out in the form of a bottle. That's what we do. We extract it from the plants, put it in a bottle, pour it around. You know, at fried foods, for example, we may put it using salad dressings and things like that. That oil in the plants is composed mainly of two things. Well, it's also composed of parts what's in the olives too, the monounsaturates. But in addition to that, there's saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are mostly found in animal food. The plants have the polyunsaturated fatty acids, along with some monos, but they're polyunsaturates. The polyunsaturates, multiple unsaturated bonds along that chain, they're subject to oxidation, chemical reactivity. And among those polyunsaturated fatty acids, there's two kinds. One is so-called omega-3. They're good ones. And the other is omega-6. And once again, when you start examining this, it's not all black or white. One's all bad and one's good. It's the ratio of the two.
Right.
That nature uses in various assembly ways to work together. You know, maybe sometimes have a little extra pro-oxidation. The omega-6 are pro-inflammatory. They tend to actually react in a way to create some free radicals, like I spoke about before.
Yeah.
So that's what omega-6 to give free radicals that causes damage.
So even supplementing like omega-3s, right? There's a lot of controversy about should
Right.
we, because if you're isolating, then that chemical works different in isolation than it does inside the olive, right?
Right.
Because, like, I mean, just to go back to the olive, because that blew our minds when we were talking about it, that so then you have those inflammatory, pro-inflammatory aspects of the olive, but inside the olive, you know, it goes back to there's antioxidants and things that balance that out in the natural state
Right.
that counter it.
Right.
And, you know, and then to just jump onto, you know, another topic was nutrients and vitamins and minerals, right? And how a half cup of apples has the antioxidant protective capabilities of about 1,500 milligrams of scientifically isolated vitamin C, even though a half cup of apples only has about 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C in it. And
That's
so
an example, yeah.
So, I mean, it goes back to like the amazement of just watching the cell move, where it's like, what's the mechanism that's going on here, right? And like, it's all of the parts that are all intermingling.
Kind of the same idea
Yeah,
with, I believe, isolating calcium or isolating protein.
Right.
And just taking that in supplement form and seeing that leads to fracture.
Right.
And again, you know, we'll talk about policy here in a little bit, but recognizing, you know, the information that's coming to us of like dairy, or calcium only takes away from the whole.
Exactly.
Takes away from this natural form that is already represented in nature, as in, you know, there's all of these mechanisms. And so what place do we have, I think, in society today where unless you can get everyone to eat a whole food plant-based diet, is supplementation a recommendation that we have for individuals that are either on an American diet or haven't transitioned fully into whole food diet? Or is it better to steer clear of supplementation, in your opinion?
Well, you know, of course, there's lots of different, incidentally, when I talk about antioxidants, beta carotene, which is a probiotic, or prebiotic, that is one carotenoid, and that doesn't do all the work. That's the one we study mostly. But there's, you know, there's at least 700 or 1,000 different kind of carotenoids, and all they're playing with each other through a teamwork kind of thing.
Right.
So beta carotene is one of the carotenoids. And then a different team may be working over here as opposed to over here. No less shaking. So that's a fascinating idea too. It's not one.
Right.
You were talking about, you know, taking one thing out, like the calcium or something like that.
Right.
It's the same thing. When in the plants, those things we get excited about, we take the chemical out of it and we work with it in a laboratory, you know, in a test tube or a petri dish or something like that. We work with it and try to understand something about its chemistry, about this, about that. We discover that it has antioxidant properties, let's say. So we get excited about it because antioxidants are special.
Right.
So we put them in a pill and then administer it, and sometimes it can have the opposite effect.
Right.
Because it's taken away the context.
beta
Context is
carotenoids.
everything.
The beta carotenoids, for example, they had to end a study early because they were supplementing beta carotenoids to smokers.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
That was one of the famous studies, yeah.
Yeah, and then the people who were taking the scientifically isolated version of this antioxidant, which is supposed to be so good, ended up getting increased rates of lung cancer.
That's what it showed.
Which is, you know, so it's, I mean, how many component parts do you figure are involved in nutritional biochemistry with what you're eating? I mean, billions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Truly, add to that, this is important too. So you got whatever number, it's an infinite number, you know, these substances.
Right.
The others, and they're kind of working together. And the other part of this is really important to remember too. Whatever, at some moment in time, here's a combination of things work together, but one nanosecond later, or even less. 1 nanosecond later, it's changed.
1 nanosecond.
So, nature is just rearranging and just using the tools it has, for various and sundry purposes at various and sundry times.
Right.
So what if we can, imagine, here's the static state. Here's what it is, all these million different things. The next, as I say, one tiny fraction of a second later, it can all change. So nature, that's what it does. Can we imagine? I mean, it's not impossible. It's not impossible, but we can't fathom, describing that kind of thing. All we know is all working together.
Have you expanded outward even to then identify the mechanisms of all that's happening just within nutrition, and then the proponents of vitamin D coming from sun, or sleep and hormonal changes in melatonin, and how that affects our digestion? And
That's right. That's when the sun comes into play again.
Right.
In addition to photosynthesis, the sun also has some very beneficial effects, obviously, in the form of certain chemicals we study. But the thing is, once again, we got our body doing a million different things. Whether it's making the hormones or enzymes or increasing in transport or something, whatever. You got all these different activities going on. Amongst the, as I say, let's say certainly trillions of cells, trillions of reactions when you consider that for every static state there is. And that's just nothing but, I call it nature.
Yeah.
We're watching nature work.
Yeah.
We just know she knows pretty well what she's doing.
right.
And all we need to do is to eat the foods that she loves best to do
Right.
the work that she does. I find it a fascinating concept.
It's almost simple. It's almost
It is,
It's almost
it's
too simple.
It is. It's kind of simple. Let's get out of the weeds. When we're talking about one thing at a time, that's being something special. To think that we could take that one thing and put it in a pill to accomplish the big world of effect,
Right.
that's mindless and so ridiculous.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. We can, I should say, modify the school, but occasionally you would take out one chemical like that. We study it in the lab. We learn it's an antioxidant. We might put it in kind of a living system or something like that, and test it, whatever. We can see it have some benefit because it contributes to antioxidant activity. Oh, we know now it's an antioxidant. Then we study the structure. Oh, here's why it's able to be metabolized in these free radicals. We can learn those kind of things. That's good information. In that sense, it's good information because it teaches us, what this chemical is and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to biology,
Right.
the real live system,
Yeah.
then it's something different. Then all the good stuff is sitting there ready to do its work.
All the component parts.
All the component parts.
It's like, you go to Home Depot and if you find a really nice tool, that one nice tool doesn't, like the nature is the whole hardware store all at once, right?
Right.
It's not just one nice tool. It's like, well, actually I need this tool and that piece of lumber and that pipe and this wire. And it's like, that's what nature naturally gives us because that's the intentional design, right?
Absolutely.
I'm curious almost if we're just raised with linearity, Newtonian one way, and so whenever we're studying and learning, we're always going back to reductionist, and we're trying to find a solution through reducing that can't come from reducing. It has to come from dynamic, interconnected parts. And
Right.
so you're not just looking at one proponent, and that's what I really love about lifestyle medicine, of recognizing, what is our intentional design, what is the nature of how we were supposed to be, and how far removed have we come from nature that we're just putting out fires. And so coming back to that idea of dynamic interconnectedness.
Yeah, there's another component of that, what she said is exactly right. Another component of that is when nature's doing good here, it's going to be doing good there. If they're doing good in this kind of disease situation, very likely it's going to be doing good here. Nature doesn't work against herself. That's another phenomenon I find very attractive.
Right.
And so when we're consuming a whole food, plant-based diets, for example, we see that cancer risk is decreased, heart disease risk is decreased, chronic kidney disease is decreased. We have real evidence for that. And so nature is pervasive,
Right.
in the larger context as well as in the micro context with cells.
So, and then just for anyone listening, when we say whole food plant-based diet, we're not talking about veganism, right, as it's consumed, because veganism just means no animal products.
That's pretty simple idea, no animal parts.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the whole food plant-based diet, though, means real foods. It means whole foods, vegetables, potatoes, grains, the real foods that we can eat, complex carbohydrates, only produced by nature. And this is an important thing because it causes a lot of confusion out there, because a whole food plant-based diet is much different than a low-fat diet. And we hear a lot about low-fat diets not being as effective as something like, ketogenic diet or something, but it's not the same thing, right? So
Right.
you just want to touch on that in research and how that causes a lot of confusion?
Yeah, well, the idea of vegetarianism has been around a long time, since at least the middle 1800s in Western, and England, actually, I think where it started. But in any case, that ended up being used in the sense that 90% of vegetarians are still using dairy.
Mm-hmm.
And they also tend to use extra added oil, stuff like that, too much. So they have some advantage in the sense they're using less animal food. That's helpful, probably. But that's only one component. And so then it makes an excuse, an allowance, let's say, for people to still use some other food that they, for whatever reason they like, whether they're told to like milk.
Right.
So 90% of vegetarians, more or less, I guess that's the latest figures, are still using dairy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them use fish, occasionally, stuff like that. Vegans, when I was coming to that awareness, it was actually in the late 1970s. I was on a government panel that had the responsibility of determining the priority for various of some of the research applications coming in, which ones to fund, which ones not. So there was a panel of about 15 of us or so. We'd meet every 3 times a year, review a lot of so-called applications, read the justification for what they wanted to do and that sort of thing. And the panel I was on at that time was one focused on cancer research proposals. And so most of them that were there were molecular biologists, cancer researchers of one kind or another, or maybe oncologists. And so they all focused on, just cancer, and they usually consider it possible the cause of cancer as well as the treatment of cancer. They usually consider it in the context of one thing at a time. So then you study that in great detail. A lot of these applications were that way. But just this, as I say, late 1970s, there's a few projects were coming and suggested maybe we should look at something about nutrition. And I was the only nutritional biochemist on that panel at the time. So they hadn't been trained in any nutrition. So they said, the next meeting we get together, why don't you spend some time and sort of tell us what you know about nutrition? So I did that. The next time, I'm thinking the night before, what am I going to say? I don't want to say vegetarian. I don't want to use that word because that's too confined. And that was kind of popular, well known. Veganism wasn't known, at least for me.
Right.
Just vegetarian. I didn't want to use the word, so I tried to come up with something more descriptive of science. So I said plant-based. And that's kind of stood the test of time. It's really catching on.
I didn't recognize that you
That's
actually
huge.
coined the term plant-based.
Yeah, I did.
That's excellent.
I'm not sure, but then a little later, maybe just about 3 or 4 years later, whatever it was, the nutrient supplement industry was beginning, trying to take advantage of a report that I was on with the cabinet describing nutrition cancer. They wanted to take advantage of this information and talk about putting nutrients into pills. So it's the middle 80s, early 80s, middle 80s. So there was some entrepreneurial people out there who were starting to make claims about these wonderful things, the plants that could do this and that.
Right.
And they started misquoting our report of 1982. The National Academy got a bit upset with that because these claims were getting out of hand. So they went to the Federal Trade Commission and asked them to step in, try to, quiz these people. Are their claims right or wrong? Let's hear the justifications. So they actually asked me on those trials went over 3 years actually. I was the one to be sitting there in the docket, evaluating in a sense these claims from a nutritional perspective.
Yeah.
And so, I can tell you, this is an industry wanting to make some money.
Right.
So some of the claims they were making was off the chart, way off the chart.
Yeah.
So that gave me a new kind of experience to see what goes on. That was the birth of the modern day vitamin supplement industry.
Which is a $500 billion, multi-billion dollar.
It's huge. And now we got, latest figures I saw, I think it was something 90% of adults. No, it's not that high. For somewhere around 78% of adults do use vitamin supplements.
Right.
Or one sort of thing or another. And what they end up doing in their minds, they kind of convincing themselves they're doing some good stuff because after all this came from plants, they might say, well, they're doing some good and they don't I want to eat what I want to eat. So they're using the supplements as they sort of are surrogated. Well, okay, I'll use this, I'll be okay, I'll just take a pill.
Yeah.
I watched from that point onwards, after my sitting in the docket and being really scolded by the attorney and stuff like that. It was crazy, but I had to look at all these things. Then, so I watched the proliferation of research studies being organized subsequent to that to see if any of that's true. And there was quite a lot of studies being done. Does vitamin C do this? Does vitamin B, so forth and so on? I watched it closely from 1985 or so until 2015 maybe. During that period, I was trying to keep an open mind. Is there any place in the world where one of these things can really work? And during that, lots of other people were doing the same thing. And it all came out when we summarized, looked back.
None of it.
Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
Right.
In many cases, it may be harmless, but it wasn't doing what needed to be done. Eat the right food. Don't take it away from nature and say we're smarter than somehow it's going to be that way.
And after the antioxidant description of how that's protecting against like the machine gun bullets going out into the food, and how they protect against that makes a lot more sense when we look at the research that shows that a plant-based person's blood, when exposed to pathogens, and I think even cancer cells, is much more efficient at neutralizing the invader or the cancer cell.
Yes.
Because they have more ability to block all those bullets than a person who's animal-based and is lacking all of those component parts.
Right. Dr. Dean Ornish, very well known for his work in heart disease, actually did a little work like that. He was working on one part of it, but sure enough, people who changed their diet somewhat were changed in a favorable way, shows so that dairy did not cause the cancer as otherwise would not be known to do. So he's to be given credit for doing some of that.
Is that the liver cancer?
No, that was prostate cancer.
That's prostate cancer.
Yeah, we now know well, actually, remarkable studies comparing other different societies. The more skim milk consumption is consumed, the higher is the rate of prostate cancer. And skim milk is something that doesn't have fat in it, theoretically. It's mostly just the animal protein. It's like a protein drink. So the more skim milk is consumed, the higher the rates of prostate cancer. It's almost like a linear relationship. It's very impressive.
Oh my God.
And it's a protein effect.
Dr. Campbell, you don't know, I used to take nutrition and like bodybuilding and supplementation. They have casein protein that you can take at night because it's slow digesting. I used to take casein protein every night and drink this stuff because it's supposed to be slow digesting. So I'm just all night long, I'm mortified now to find out, but all night long I was just elevating my IGF and my growth factors and just the worst combination. But with dairy, what about calcium? Does calcium from dairy make stronger bones?
No, not really.
This is from a dairy farmer, everyone.
I would like to have believed that, quite frankly.
Right.
But quite frankly, the more consumption of dairy, the higher there's the rate of osteoporosis, we call it, a higher bone fracture rate.
Wow.
This is around the world too, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, compared to different countries, it's really quite impressive. Dairy does not do what I always heard.
Right.
as a kid. You know,
I feel like it's a no-brainer now for those of us that are living this lifestyle to recognize how good we feel and how much clarity that it comes with, and how there's a decrease in illness, and really looking at how to translate this information into systems. And I know everybody's doing due diligence, and we recognize that we're sitting with one of the individuals that has most likely made the biggest dent in this nutritional transformation. And from Dr. Clapper to Dean Ornish to Dr. Goldhammer and everybody who's doing their due diligence, where is the most important interjection, in your opinion, needing to be made? Is it the medical school? Is it in media? Is it in the government agencies? That we get this firstly to the mass audience. In our opinion too, what we recognize is most individuals don't even know what feel good is or what feel good feels like until they've embodied it. And then starting to recognize that, as we go on this lifestyle over the years, you keep hitting these plateaus of how well you feel, especially when there's contrast from eating American diet for so long. Where would you suggest for those of us that are out here trying to get the information out to interject into?
there's many points, perspectives on that question. By the way, before going further, I developed the word plant-based that's widely used. Actually, just since I was here, well, I've heard this sort of before, but the word plant-based, some have been a little bit critical. When you say plant-based, then that means it's just got some plants in it, in the diet.
Right.
And I understand that. I was only thinking about that just the night before we go down here. Somebody's come up with a little bit better description of that. Alan Goldhammer. He's talking about whole plants. Just eat whole plants.
Whole plants.
Whole plants! That's very Dr. Goldhammer.
So I think that, I just heard him saying that again here, so.
He's been using that for a while. He's coining a different term there.
Yeah.
Whole plants, not
Just
just
stick with whole
plant-based.
plants.
Yeah. That's
That's important.
It's a different lifestyle here at True North than
Yeah.
most other places.
Yeah, you had a question, I forget.
Yeah, and because truly the idea is to change systems,
yeah.
to change systems somehow. And I mean, a part of my brain is thinking medical schools. That's where it starts.
Right.
And even though I think that to be true, perhaps it's media, perhaps it's lobbying. But I know you've been doing so much work in this realm. In your opinion, like, where is the most important place, and how does the rest of us contribute to that same work?
Well, from my own background, I've been fortunate to have had the experience of working, so to speak, inside the cell.
Right.
Yeah.
As a biochemist with my students and stuff, and then with whole cells, whole people. In other words, basic research. That's of course my principal activity. So I've seen the origin of information, how it's formed, and what gets published. Because I was on the editorial board, still am, in one case, to see the work of others and be critical about it. From that level up through the hierarchy of knowledge development and control. And there is, we have an apparatus that's sort of systemic or system-wide system in our governance, involving the government, together with the industry, working together, that basically they have enormous power. And basically they're providing information in the form of guidelines or advisories. They're providing information, I can tell you, it's tilted. They do not let scientists speak, quite frankly, on something a little bit different very usually. And so the whole system is tilted through policy development. Of course, I was on policy committee, so I saw that too. And in one place where it's also a portal of entry, if you will,
Right.
is in the agencies that are responsible for providing funding for this research. In my area, in our area, it's the National Institutes of Health,
Right.
NIH. And NIH is composed of 27 different institutes, each one dedicated to something specific. there's a bit of a problem right there, but each one of them dedicated to something specific. The Cancer Institute, the Heart Institute. Actually, the Cancer Institute funded 90% of my research, which is quite generous over the years, just trying to defend the science. They didn't know I was working so much on nutrition. I was working on trying to figure out how cancer works.
Right.
So, it just turned out, at the end of the day, the tail was wagging the dog. It was the nutrition that really intrigued me. But in any case, the National Institutes of Health have 27 institutes, parts of Cancer Institute and so forth. There's not one called the Institute of Nutrition.
Wow.
And here is the single premier, most important science of all. They don't have an institute to really focus on this question. So therefore, the study of nutrition is being done for various and sundry purposes, but it's not focused on the kind of things we're talking about. And even now, there's been some proposals, I'm one of them, that's really been pushing for some years to have an institute of nutrition. They're not going to do it.
Right.
Wow.
They came up with a flimsy excuse that, they'll take funding and put it into the director's office. Well, the director has to be a geneticist. And I can assure you, in that office, in that environment, nutrition is not what they're talking about. Because nutrition controls genes.
Yeah.
So we end up in this business talking a lot about genetic this, genetic that, genes do all kinds of things, because we're looking for drugs too, to impact this gene or that gene or some other gene, forgetting about the fact that whether those genes, bad genes, let's say, are expressed or not is a function of what we decide to eat. So the nutrition part of it. So coming back to, we don't have an institute of nutrition.
Right.
We need to have that for starters. We need to have that. I should say, I put a comment in here that said, really, we have one senator for that, who is the subcommittee chair of the Ag Committee, which provides all the funding. That fellow, he's become acquainted. I've talked to him on the internet. He is a vegan. I don't use that word very much, but anyhow, he knows the work I did. He knows the film that came out and all that sort of stuff. But he's in a powerful position to make some comment about all of this. And he's not really lucky. Even though he's a powerful senator, it's Senator Cory Booker.
Ah.
Yeah, he's
Oh, wow.
Cory Booker is, he's got the right things going on his head, as far as I'm concerned, a very audible, I think, a fellow. And, but even his tenure or electability, if you will, has got to be handled with some care. But at least we got one person in there that's beginning to understand some of this stuff.
So you think that, how much of it, well, that's this is a huge rabbit hole, but you can't even do research on the whole food plant-based diet because nobody wants to fund that, and there's no money in it, and it's anti-protein, which, as I've heard you say, got a holy baptism from the start, the word protein meaning of great importance.
Yes.
And so it's got this, and I wonder if like the ketogenic and the paleo diet, they're so popular, one, because everyone likes good news about their bad behavior. And so the idea that you can eat pork rinds and bacon and, sausage and steak with blue cheese on it sounds really nice, depending if it's, keto or paleo, whatever. But those get a lot of popularity, and so, but they also are effective. But how much of their, in public support is because they're a high protein promoting a solution, but it's not really a solution.
Good question, and I think it has a lot of importance to brief answer. In fact, I've been just focusing on this recently and put some papers and stuff like this. Of all the nutrients that we know of, and we say there's only 40, 50, that's not true. We got 4 or 5 million. But we narrowed it down to at least those that have been identified. Of all the nutrients that influence our behavior over time, I'm suggesting that the single nutrient that has had the most impact on public thinking is protein. Mm-hmm. Most people believed in the beginning and still believe today that protein comes from animals.
Right.
So, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Animal-based protein is what turned the cancer on. It's what caused the serum cholesterol to go up. And then more people, when they consume more animal protein, a lot of diseases just go up like that in a straight line. So, and I might add, incidentally, it's not just the protein, go back to the holism concept. The protein triggers people to buy that food because they're assuming that I can't get my protein, you gotta get my protein. Protein's an important nutrient, there's no question about that. But that triggers them to think, I've gotta eat meat, milk and dairy, or eggs. Meat, milk and eggs.
Misinformation, which
It's a long time been ingrained in our noggin that somehow those foods are really, really important because we have to have the protein. That's where my difficulty rises because I come along, start talking about, wait, we got some questions here.
Truth.
I'm not the first one that raises questions, but you know, the system pushes back when smack it down.
So that brings it right back to, like, you know, the joke at the start was that after your research where we know that a diet higher in protein can cause cancer proliferation leading to
Higher in animal protein.
higher animal protein,
Yeah.
right, leads to premature death, then where is the missing link between that being a huge, like, light bulb in the government?
Good question. I wrestled with that idea, and as I say, I've worked at various levels. In fact, there was one time when I was the senior representative, or the main representative to Congress, on behalf of the entire medical research community.
Yeah.
So I've given testimony before committee, so I've seen at that level, you know, the play of politics in this,
Right.
which in turn is the play of corporate interest.
Yeah. So nutrition directly combats corporate interest.
Nutrition comes along, I come along and say this nonsense that I'm talking about according to them. You know, I'm talking about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that idea can be captured by individuals. And if they do it right, they don't need to buy all those pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Just do it right. That kills an industry.
Yeah.
There's two big industries that I get confronted by. One is the ag industry, because that's largely composed of people producing meat, milk, and eggs, right?
Right.
That's one industry. The ag, very powerful, very powerful. And then the other one is the pharmaceutical industry.
Totally.
That have been running the show for
That's
a
been
really
running
long
the show.
time.
It's going to get worse.
I think, you know, and our interest too is you're looking at a whole new generation of individuals spawning up. And I think there's a high interest for truth in these individuals. And I think that's why you're seeing in the past 5 years, 10 years, this whole food plant-based, it's everywhere now. You're seeing it in grocery stores, you're seeing it on the shelves, you're seeing it and I think what we're looking at is truth is somehow prevailing. And these systems are changing, hopefully with the information coming to youth. And I think that's the next question is, are you seeing this information that you've been teaching us, that individuals are starting to come to know, to the college students and to high school students even?
Right.
Is there any sort of acknowledgement that this is being taught more? Not just in medical school, but in college campuses.
Yes, I understand a lot of that. That's absolutely true. The younger people, as the case for any kind of, let's call them revolutionary thoughts, different kind of thinking, it often starts with young people. You know, any period or history in this, that, or something else. And again, younger people are clearly not emboldened, not captured by the paradigm of the day. Necessarily, they're more inquisitive. So I think there is hope with younger people. I mean, I see it in the university students. When I retired, I'm still emeritus, so I'm still officially an official member of the faculty, but I don't have to, you know, do all the other kinds of work at the moment. When I retired, I was told for a few years thereafter, at least 50% of the students enrolling in Cornell in area of nutrition, a few hundred, were coming because they thought I was there, which is a reflection somehow of the younger people. And so as a result of that, I've been invited back every year, prior to the pandemic year, by the students you know, to give a lecture. Pretty well attended and stuff like that, you know, on the
I would
campus.
imagine, yeah.
But they, even the campus is trying to do some things to sort of make that difficult.
Right.
And especially against the students who would choose to dare to ask me to come and talk about it. So the institutional power is incredible.
Right.
And so it is a contest between those, especially young people. I say young people and also put some emphasis on girls, on women. I've seen during my career that women are very quick compared to men to pick up on this idea. You know, for the most part.
Their brains work better than man brains, let's be honest. Like it's
Well,
true.
they pick up on it for a couple of reasons. One, they tend to be the cooks in the house.
Hmm.
And of course, they're the mothers,
Right.
the children. And so women, they do that. I mean, I have to give credit to my wife. You know, I was learning all this stuff, and you know, okay, I'm going to change a little bit here and there, and so forth and so on. She picked up on it right at the time that plant-based diet, plant-based terminology.
Yeah.
I made that public. And it's about that time, she's getting kind of interested because we had 4 children at the time. We had a 5th one after that, and so she started changing the diet. And we both come from very simple backgrounds. My father had a couple years formal education, so I came from the farm. Her mother, my wife's mother, my wife didn't go to college, so we're pretty simple folk, if you will. And so, she was hearing this and reminded me, you know, we should start eating this way. Wasn't that meant we probably should eat more salads? So we had more salads, but there were tuna salads and egg salad. we cut the red meat, and then when I got into quitting the dairy, etc., etc. So I give her a lot of credit. She's the one who made me write the China study.
Really?
Yeah, I was coming home and complaining about this, that, and something else. And I think she was getting tired of it. And she started working on me. She said, why don't you publish a book and tell the public? Stop talking only to the scientists, talk to the public.
Wow.
So and the China study happened because of that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
This is great information because again, it's all information coming to the population.
Right.
And right now, everybody's on their social media. So that's where we got the idea of milk was the solution for calcium, or the meat industry was the solution for our protein, and we're conditioned into it. We're deeply conditioned into it. So as we go forward, we need to speak to the women. Yeah, the women growing up.
They're important.
Yeah, absolutely so. And yeah,
Because they control the men, right? So if you get the women, then you'll get all the men. There's more than a
Do you
couple.
say that to women?
Yeah, I
Yes,
tell them the truth.
they get all the support for sure. And they're raising the next generation.
That's right.
They're raising.
That's one thing that I started my career working with malnourished children in the Philippines. That was a game changer for me. It left an imprint on me I never can forget. And being there with malnourished and starving children, you know, in the slums and so forth, not getting even milk of any kind of nutrition, let alone, and I wasn't into the meat, you know, the animal food thing at that point in time, but I remember all the images of these children, some of them totally destitute, you know, not even belonging to a family, living on the doorstep of the hotel where it was, or you know, just, and so I was very moved by that, you know, at the time, because we were, at the time, following the paradigm of the day. These kids were supposed to get better if we could make sure they got more protein, animal-based protein. And I saw something, they didn't exactly agree with that. So I have reflected on that, because I got offered a couple of jobs at the beginning of my career to come and work in that sphere, in that domain, pretty significant jobs, and it's had to make a choice. It would have involved my going to the Philippines and taking a family with me, or not. And I didn't go down that road, but I've always remembered, you know, those children. So when my wife was saying, you know, things like, you know, you got to write that book for the children of the world. That was really important.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
Deeply profound to recognize how big this is influencing a global community, and especially
especially if we were misinformed on how to feed the third world.
Absolutely.
With me personally.
Which is, in like the China study, when you were studying that, there were differences 300-fold sometimes, right? Between different areas.
Right.
So is there any doubt in your mind that nutrition and health are not directly related?
No doubt.
No
That's
doubt.
easy to answer that one.
Totally.
Yeah.
Specifically, will you just expand a little bit about some of those findings in the animal-based percentages and how they affected directly the health outcomes of the population?
Yeah, that's expressed, I think, by just looking at, let's say, comparing a bunch of different societies or countries.
Yeah.
You simply compare the level of intake of this, that, or some other nutrient or food with, let's say, the emergence of different kinds of cancer, heart disease, whatever.
Yes.
And what we see as animal protein consumption has increased, it's a straight line relationship.
Right.
And the line, that regression line, really goes right through the XY origin.
Which is a perfect relationship.
Well, it's almost a perfect relationship because what that says in theory, as soon as you put a little bit into the food, somebody's going to be impacted.
Right.
Possibly. It's a very powerful sort of metric.
Yeah.
In many ways. But when that's published, it's not published quite that way. They'll say skim milk. Well, skim milk is a protein cocktail, an animal protein cocktail. They'll say it's eggs, or they'll say it's saturated fat. They're always making excuses. They don't want to come and say, except for one paper I know, they won't come and say this is a relationship between animal protein and these diseases.
Yeah.
It's that foreign to our narrative. The whole idea of challenging this almost religious reverence for animal protein is crazy. It's really crazy. And so and I'm not the first one to challenge that. There were others in the past. Their careers were ruined, or they're thrown out of their society, or this or that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I mean, now you're even looking at, going back to what we're talking about as far as nature is the president, and to recognize just in and of itself, our consumption of animal products is environmentally causing chaos.
Yes.
And taking that into account, again, it's in and of itself is showing that there's dysfunction in
That's right.
the behavior of eating these products. Is, we love to use the body as a feedback mechanism. Is our behaviors creating chaos or dissonance or imbalances in us? And when there's pain or disease or strife, how do we move back into health? And so if you look at the whole of the global system, clearly there must be a dysfunctional behavior pattern
Yes.
in how we're consuming animals. And so hoping to rectify all these things that we're talking about, rejoining with nature, understanding our relationship to the environments, and being able to educate these systems to see the whole picture.
Right.
As you wrote in your book here so eloquently, that you can't reduce any of it. It's all kind of
You
coming
can't.
to, yeah.
It's just deciding. The single most important thing I think we can do for the future, just decide what we put on our fork and spoon, what we choose to eat.
Right.
That is the number one cause of environmental problems, livestock rearing. It's the number one cause of eating wrong food. It's the number one cause, quite frankly, of cost of health care. I mean, the medical system, driven largely by the pharmaceutical industry, they got something in their claws. They make a lot of money,
Right.
and it's the wrong model. That's not where you get health from. It makes wealth for the few,
Right.
but it doesn't make health for the many.
And that's where we get we're 44th on life expectancy,
Yes.
but our healthcare costs are 3 times higher than every other.
It's ridiculous. It's just insane.
It's insane. It's insane.
It begs the question of, what do we do to ourselves? Why do we do that? And all that sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. That's insanity to me when you look at how unhealthy we are and the fact that we have some of the most advanced medical equipment and capabilities in the world, if not the most advanced, in the United States. Yet we are 44th on life expectancy, with a life expectancy that is starting to actually decline for the
That's right.
first time in 100 years ever.
And since the records were kept.
Since the record of human health, it's the
Yeah.
first. So it's a serious finding.
Yes, it is.
That's really, and the life of suffering. That's a really important thing too, is that people are living shorter lives with extended periods of suffering.
Yeah, that's it, right. The end stage, I mean, we're all going to leave the earth, obviously. But we'd rather do that, I think, without having to go through a lot of pain or suffering prior to doing that.
Yeah.
It would be a nice way to think about it. And extend our life in the process, too, to some extent. But it's really avoiding all those difficulties of having to figure out which of the 40, 30, or 40 pills we're taking today.
Yeah.
Sounds like we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
And here at True North, right, seeing people actually heal, right, and seeing the model of how, and it's all in the body, and all we have to do to see these radical transformations in health, where people are blood pressures going down, they're reducing their diabetes, a whole plant diet. It's a whole plant diet now, and psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis, all these things are going away with the diet. And getting off the medications, right? And that's the real power that happens when you just take the poison out of the veins. And so, like, all this talk is, it's poison in the veins, because it's either inflammatory foods that are animal products or pro-oxidative without any protection, and plants are antioxidant and protective and actually vital. And so that's,
Well, this concept of whole. I got my lessons working with cells, and then seeing a whole body and all like that. I have to compliment you guys on a component. This whole health equation that I've sort of been familiar with it, but not. You really have a lot of intricate information on how to go about actually applying this information, movement, breathing. We all know the way you describe it. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Helping me in a sense, because it's kind of it's another piece of the pie.
Right.
Really important piece. And we have the pie if we don't have that.
Yeah.
Pie is not a very good example.
Well,
Piece of the apple.
Yeah, slice the apple.
It's really, again, it's observing nature.
Yeah.
Always going back to, it's already been shown to us how to live, how to eat, how to interact.
Right.
And so somehow taking nature's information and example and bringing it into what we just, clearly are seeing are dysfunctional systems, whether it's naturally evolved on its own, whether there's vested interest, who knows? But the idea is somehow, how do we bring nature into our homes, bring nature into, or us actually going into nature and interacting more so with what we are, and really trying to bring your information with movement, with all these other proponents. So hopefully we can, figure out what systems to change, who to talk to, what medical schools or colleges.
Right. And the basis of the physiology, when we look at the whole picture again, understanding, with the mindset is one piece I think that we do articulate well, which is that the body experiences our thoughts as emotions. When the thought happens, it triggers the neurohormone, neuropeptide to be released, and that's released into the bloodstream, which then travels through the bloodstream and hits every cell in the body. And so the thought manifests as reality as the neurohormone, neuropeptide, and then is experienced by the body as it hits receptor cell. That can be angst receptors from cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine, or it can be happiness and bliss from thoughts of peace and just basking in the sensory awareness of the body, and that we are the awareness and we get to experience the world through our body. And also we are the creator who has the authority to take charge of the armies of neurohormones and neuropeptides that flood our system to create well-being, true well-being, which is the nutrients that we consume that are the building blocks for the cells, and the information that we send the cells, because that neurohormone, neuropeptide information is actually the environment that the cells live in. And so the experience of those neurohormones and neuropeptides is what we really, that's how we create well-being, is looking at that whole picture and integrating that systemically, which is really cool.
It really is. I mean, it does. You can describe nursing either in a sense, biochemically, physiologically, anatomically in a sense,
Right.
and mentally. All those components are part of who we are.
Yeah.
And you take out one, you're kind of pulling out a brick out of the foundation.
It's like we said earlier, I think it's really important for us to understand it, to create a connection.
Yeah.
And once we understand it, you can't just say eat this food or do this exercise.
Right.
The education is the proponent, because I think we know truth when we hear it.
Right.
And then that light bulb propels us to make behavior changes accordingly. So I'm over the moon, grateful for you.
I just have a couple last questions that are easy. Who are your heroes in research, Dr. Campbell? Who have been your heroes in research, and who do you admire right now that is doing research?
Well, as I look back, the people that before my time, some of them were still living when I was alive too, who, one thing they had in common, they dared to challenge. That's one common element. They dared to challenge. A lot of them got hurt. The reputation, we don't know them now. I could give some names, but it's kind of sad when you look at the history that there have been people speaking up with lesser information than I have, but still, they dare to challenge. That's whoever that person really is. In the modern day, I don't pick and want to identify one colleague more important than another colleague. I've got a lot of colleagues who are doing their thing.
Right.
And they've also contributed information that when I'm thinking about the whole again.
Excellent.
I can name some people that were early on.
Yeah.
That when I was in the lab working in the realm of academia, we tended not to go out to the public to talk. And when I had that opportunity, almost forced of it, because the New York Times had singled out our study and featured it, in their science section, then I sort of had to do this. And that's when my wife said, Karen told me, write a book and have something to work on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at that time, in the early 90s, there was an individual I first met. I mentioned that at least. Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. John McDougall, and Dr. Ellen Goldhaber.
Wonderful.
Different story in my meeting with Alan. But I could feel like I've already left out too many, but the book that I just wrote, I dedicated the book to those individuals who had the courage to stand up.
Wonderful. And that's the future of nutrition.
And sometimes their names are not known. And so I don't want to overlook those who are lesser known, because they did have that one feature.
Yes.
It's really important we maintain this as a society.
Right.
For those who are trained in the area, especially when they're paid money, public money, to do this. I mean, all of my life. If we can't stand up and say what we can't go back and tell the taxpayer what we did with our money.
Right.
Especially if it's something that the public can do. That's not honesty. It's not moral.
Right. The dare to challenge, because one of my favorite quotes is, the greatest obstacle to growth is not the lack of information, but the illusion of knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
And so we get caught up in our dogmas that we're all taught,
Exactly.
and then that blocks us from being able to adventure into the unknown.
Right.
And then to challenge the status quo and the industries and the bureaucratic endeavor, then it is an uphill battle, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have another question for me?
I am beyond Satan right now. I'm smitten. Thank you so much.
You guys are, we're closing off with Dr. T. Colin Campbell. We are very excited for sharing this information. He is really the maverick and one of the mavericks in this transformation that we're seeing live in the global scene. We thank you so very much for spending time sharing this information. We will get it out to as many people as possible to help cultivate that change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Arm yourselves with anti-machine gun whole plants.
Get your hands on one of his books.
Yes.
Excellent.
Gentlemen,
Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate it.
and please leave any questions or comments. We love hearing from you guys.
Also, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And make sure to head over to optimalalignmenthealth.com for our free giveaways.
Like the pathway to your pleasure and life satisfaction. If you have any comments or want to set up a consultation to break through to your next level of health, you can set up a free breakthrough session with us. The link for that is below in the notes.
Alrighty, you guys have a great day. All the love.
And all the power.